to Sgwrs, Estyn's podcast series where we discuss a range of topics with the aim of supporting the education and training workforce in Wales. So thank you for joining me today. My name is Aranwen Morgans-Thomas and I'm joined today by...
Gareth Rhys, Head Teacher of Pontedilais Comprehensive in Swansea.
And Stuart Davis, Head Teacher of Cathays High School in Cardiff.
Thank you both for joining me today. We recently published a thematic report on fostering mutual respect and promoting positive behaviours in secondary schools. The report explores approaches to promoting positive behaviours, and the toolkit that accompanies the report is there to support schools on their behaviour journeys and to provide questions around their journey on this behaviour. In this brief session, we're going to focus on the approaches that schools are taking to promote positive behaviours. What we did see in the report was, of course, that in the most effective schools, leaders did have a very clear vision around pupil behaviour and high expectations. There were robust self-evaluation processes which ensured that all members of the school community were clear and modelled good behaviour. And within that, of course, were positive working relationships that led to a sense of belonging to school. So if I start with yourself, Stuart, how do you establish and sustain this type of behaviour and this type of positivity in your school?
I think one thing that's really important is engaging the various stakeholders of the school in the kind of establishment and creation and explicit articulation of the vision, the aims, the values, the ethos of the school. So at Cathays there's been quite a long tradition of a strong and well understood ethos and mission centred around opportunities for all, which predates my 26 years at the school. And it's something that staff and children and families will speak about quite a lot and refer back to their opportunities for all mission. But what we deliberately set out to do sort of 7 or 8 years ago was to try and sort of articulate and make explicit the values and the day-to-day kind of behaviours that would feed into us living out that kind of ethos. So, we did quite a bit of work with children, with families, with staff around, what are the expected behaviours that would lead to a positive, strong community where we were able to provide opportunities for all. And from the feedback from those different stakeholders, we kind of identified 3 core values for children that categorised those positive types of behaviour. And what we did was establish 3 core values around being prepared, showing respect and having pride, what we call our PRP values, which we articulate and make explicit, several times every day at every opportunity, really, and kind of refined and exemplified what types of behaviour would lead to those values kind of being lived out, and exemplifying those. But we also identified 3 core values for staff behaviour as well, which were collaboration, ownership and team first. And in terms of behaviour, what that's been really helpful for is, I think, a key to the success of any behaviour process, system, policy being successful is a consistency amongst the staff, particularly in how that's applied. So being able to refer back to those 3 core values with staff has been really helpful in being able to exemplify and articulate that and to kind of call for that consistency.
Thank you. And that's really useful and informative. So Gareth, from your point of view, you did have a spotlight in the report around your policy, which looks at being ready, respectful and safe. So, similar to Stuart, or, can you outline then the benefits that you found of taking that type of approach?
Yes, certainly. It's something we brought in 2018, 2019, where we looked at our behaviour policy, and what we realised was we had too many school rules, and they'd mutated over years, and what that led to there was inconsistency of how they're applied. So similar to what Stuart's just mentioned, actually, we streamlined it, and we just kept the 3 school rules, being ready, respectful and safe, and the way in which that's articulated and communicated to pupils and reminding staff as well. We've got boards around the school, in assemblies, and just informally speaking to pupils. And what we find is most rules then, they'll fall under one of those 3 categories. So ready would be to do a uniform equipment, respect how pupils speak to each other, speak to staff, and generally just how they conduct themselves, safety around the school. But that's just one part of the positive behaviour policy. Again, it's the how. It's how those rules are then applied and consistently day to day and throughout each term. And we did some training on that with staff, and really at the core of that training, it was initially called emotion coaching. And what we found was that pupils who reacted poorly or adversely when they were being reprimanded or having a conversation with a member of staff, what we found then was often it could be the way in which the teacher was speaking to the child. And what the research had shown that if we stuck to what we call the 5 C's when speaking to pupils, and the 5 C's, I often forget one of them. So we got be clear first of all. So we always ask our staff to be clear with pupils, confident, consistent, compassionate. Have I got all 5? I'll go through the 5 again. Calm, clear, confident, consistent, and compassionate. And what we find is that if the staff use that approach when communicating with pupils, we usually get far better reactions from the pupils. And our teachers who embody that, they usually get the best outcomes from pupils in day-to-day conversations and within lessons as well. So it's having the ready, respectful, safe, but it's how we apply that on a day-to-day basis. And I think the strength, therefore, is the simplicity of the 3 rules. It avoids unfairness, whereas perhaps when we had the inconsistencies, pupils would perceive that, and rightly so sometimes, as being unfair, which would then lead to other behavioural problems.
Thank you both. A really interesting point, and clearly then out of that, those positive relationships build around those policies and the clarity that you've got around those. The other interesting thing, of course, that came out very strongly from the thematic was the importance of the curriculum planning in supporting pupils and in supporting them on their journey through school. And of course, pupils possibly who did face certain behavioural challenges, ensuring that they had a curriculum that was fit for purpose, be it the curriculum for Wales, of course, which gave them those challenging and interesting experiences. And of course, for the older learners then, that sort of pathway route, isn't it? That journey, so that they could have a curriculum offer that would engage them and would also ensure that they had that right path for them. And of course, underpinning that was the effective teaching as well. That came out very clearly in the report, that the curriculum sitting aside with the effective teaching was really important. And where needed, there were those additional provisions as well for pupils. So I know for yourself, Stuart, that you've trialled maybe different approaches around this aspect, and you as well, Gareth, around the curriculum and around the different ways of supporting pupils. And in the report, Stuart, of course, you have got a spotlight looking at the literacy and numeracy learning pathway in particular that you've now undertaken. Could you tell us a little bit more around this and how it's maybe supporting those pupils that were facing those challenges?
Yeah, sure. We've got a number of different bespoke curriculum pathways, and the kind of emphasis around literacy and numeracy is a focus particularly at Key Stage 3 in conjunction with those pupils identified for that having some social and emotional learning and well-being support. So there's small numbers of pupils that kind of have intervention time instead of some of the mainstream curriculum that they otherwise would have had. We do ensure that they have mainstream, so that it's not a full-time curriculum pathway for them. They have mainstream curriculum lessons alongside their peers, because we think that's important for that sense of belonging to the whole school community. Previous iterations of intervention type activities, have had pupils out of mainstream lessons for longer periods of time. But in looking at the impact of that and some of this pupil voice, we felt that we needed to rebalance that a little bit. So they do get literacy and numeracy interventions as part of the kind of curriculum to help address their needs, because some of those were barriers to their learning and their engagement in lesson. And as a fairly rational response, I guess, if you find learning and lessons difficult, one response to that is to perhaps engage in disruptive behaviour and avoid the kind of stigma attached with not being able to do the work. So, that has been an important part of the work we do with some of the children, particularly at Key Stage 3, in trying to address their needs and therefore affect an improvement in behaviour for some of those young people with greater challenges and greater vulnerability to social exclusion. At Key Stage 4, we do have that kind of more bespoke curriculum, which is more around kind of supporting young people to get qualifications and to leave the end of compulsory education with an onward learning pathway, and that takes up a great deal of the kind of intervention, resource and time and support that we have as well.
Yeah, thank you. Really interesting, as you say, in terms of that early intervention in a way, isn't it, in supporting the learners to overcome possibly those barriers that do then show themselves in terms of their behaviours very often. So would you agree, Gareth, in terms of your context, a similar sort of route or different route in terms of what you've taken?
Certainly it's very similar in terms of trying to match the provision that's going to best suit the pupils, which can be difficult at times, especially when you've got different cohorts with different needs. Particularly in years 10 and 11, we do a lot of work when the pupils are in year 9, and like many schools, we'd run a best fit options model. So rather than having fixed pools, we keep it open and ask the pupils in year 9, right, okay, what would be your ideal scenario in terms of which subjects you like to study in years 10 and 11? And we usually get about 85%, 90% match in terms of the curriculum we can put forward. So that the mix of subjects we can offer then is a mix of the more traditional academic GCSE subjects and the vocational subjects, hair and beauty, engineering, public services, a range of different vocational subjects. And the principle there, of course, is if the pupils are able to choose the subjects they're more likely to enjoy. If they enjoy it, they're probably going to be better at it, and more engaged in it. And that should then lead to improved behaviour, improved attendance as well, and improved outcomes. And I think that's very important to try and get that right when the pupils go into year 10, and of course that will give them a pathway into post-16 when they leave Pontarddulais. An alternative, I think the alternative provision for a very small number of pupils is really important. We've got, we call it T-Dysgu in Pontarddulais, where it's a converted caretaker's house. And we have a small number of pupils there where we tried everything in terms of engaging those pupils in mainstream education full time. You know, that some of these pupils perhaps are at risk of exclusion. We'd have tried perhaps managed moves or PSPs, and nothing perhaps there was working. So the T-Dysgu provision there is where they're based mainly in T-Dysgu, which is within the school site, but they do then go out for alternative provisions, Bulldogs in Port Talbot, for example, work experience, but then they also dip into certain subjects during the day as well. Those subjects where we found that they're more likely to engage and behave and not get themselves into trouble, which they would perhaps in other subjects. The limiting factor there, of course, is funding. We would like to be able to extend that perhaps a bit more as well. And in terms of pedagogy and teaching and learning, some work and training that's happened over the last 2 years is our Elenco has given training to all staff in terms of inclusive classroom practices. So it's a bit more than, say, differentiation. So I'll give you an example. One that's been particularly effective is after a teacher has given an instruction, what we used to find is that there'd be quite a few pupils who perhaps they'd forget, quite naturally, they'd forget or wouldn't understand what it is that they need to do. So when the pupils then transition onto that activity and they're working independently, we always ask the teachers to show the instructions in written form on the board or the screen in a buff background, so that the pupils then, if they do get stuck, they've got a cue, they've got something to go to try and work it out for themselves, and then that promotes independence, resilience, and again helps a pupil refocus, get engaged. And the alternative then, if they don't know what to do, that can often lead to that pupil misbehaving, and we found that's being a really effective strategy. Still quite early, and we still need to evaluate it a lot more and perhaps do some more training on that. But that's something I think has been a real benefit in terms of engaging pupils and behaviour over the last 2 years.
Thank you very much. So going on a journey there really from the curriculum planning to that effective strategies as well in the classroom to support those pupils who have those barriers possibly around their learning in that way.
Yeah, and I think just to come in, the importance of that last strategy is about all teachers using that strategy, because then the pupil, regardless of which subject they're in, if they know, okay, I'm stuck, what do? I look at the board, I see that text box with the instructions with the buff background, it's a go-to. If it just happened in 1 or 2 lessons, then perhaps they wouldn't get into that habit, and it's creating that habit of independence and resilience, which is what we're striving for. But I think that can be truly effective if all teachers are buying into it and using that practice.
And coming back to that consistency, isn't it?
Exactly,
where we started our discussions really around that. No, that's really interesting. Thank you. And of course, the other interesting thing that came out of the report was the use of mobile phones. So in terms of clearly schools have taken different approaches to their policy and their approach around this, and possibly it's evolved, it's changed over time. But, coming to you possibly, Stuart, around this, how have you navigated then this issue of mobile phone use in school and in the school environment?
Yeah, so we moved to an on-site mobile phone ban, I think it was 2018. But we spent a bit of time implementing that, so we didn't rush through it. We consulted with pupils, family, staff around the proposal to have a ban on mobile phones on site in school. And to be honest, there was overwhelming support for it, even from the pupils, actually, who, which surprised us, I think, with how positive they were about the proposal, because I think, they felt a break from their phones would be useful for them too. So, we gathered the kind of views, and it was clear there was support for it. And then we spent a bit of time working out the practical matters, what would happen if a child had a mobile phone, what would we do with it, what the conversation would be like between a member of staff and a child, where we would keep it, which allowed us to kind of address some of the practical concerns that staff might have had around what if I lose a phone that I've confiscated, or things like that. So that the time we spent preparing for its implementation was really, really important, I think. And something that came out from parents who were overwhelmingly in favour of it. But, a lot of our children travel from across the city, from all parts of the city, and they did want their child to be able to bring a mobile phone to school, to keep it in their bag or their coat, because, it was a way for them to ease their minds and worries about their child's safety on the way to and from school. And it seemed to us like a sensible safeguard and precaution. So, that was one kind of change we made following that consultation process. So once we'd kind of gone through that and decided how practically we would work it through, again, we didn't rush the implementation of it. We took the summer term of 2018 to communicate how the process would work, what the expectations would be. And we didn't start it actually in the September of 2018. We started in the October. So when we came back for a month, we kind of trailed that it was reminding pupils it was happening, reminding families and staff. So when we did start it in October 2018, I think ahead of that, we expected that we would be confiscating loads of phones every day. And actually for the first month or so, I don't think we confiscated a single phone, It was just pupils were expecting it, and they were saying to us in the week before, I can't have my phone next week, so that it was kind of well understood. So it went much better in terms of that than we expected. We did quite a bit of staff training around what staff were concerned about was if they had to take phones, would it lead to confrontations, and then would that distract from teaching and learning? Would it lead to them having... So we developed a script that they would use, that we would all use, with, wording that they would use around, we know the rules, you need to give me a phone, all very calm. So that was helpful. I think that kind of almost role-playing that script, and then the expectation that we would all use the same, whether it was the head teacher or another member of staff, we would all use the same wording. That was really, really helpful in avoiding confrontations, and that persists now. So we do have to confiscate phones now. We probably take a few every day, but it rarely leads to confrontation that escalates beyond that conversation, because that script is kind of still used. So it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the conversation around that consistent approach, that a child knows that if they're seen by any member of staff with their phone out, the staff is going to ask for their mobile phone, and it's going to be put in a central area to be stored till the end of the day. And that consistency is key. It stops young people from, saying, well, I'm allowed to use it in this class or that class. This is what everybody in the school does. This is the expectation, whether it's in a lesson, at break time, whether it's in the yard, in a classroom, in a library, wherever, you can't have your phone out. So that consistent approach, that scripted conversation that we have when phones are there, has led to a kind of system where, phones aren't out regularly. We don't have issues around pupils being distracted by phones in lessons. And there's very little confrontation as a result of that, because, it's a consistent, calm but firm conversation that members of staff are having. And it's understood, and we do revisit the reasons, because obviously it was 8 years or so ago that we launched that, 7 or 8 years ago. We do remind pupils of why this is in place, and we do remind pupils of although some those pupils weren't part of the consultation because those young people have left school, but what the consultation said, and I think generally pupils understand the reasons for the mobile phone ban still, because we do revisit a couple of times a year in our assemblies and our form classes.
Thank you. And for you, Gareth, a similar approach has been taken?
Remarkably similar, to the Stewart's situation in his school. We've banned mobile phones for many years now, and we do on a daily basis probably confiscate half a dozen perhaps during the day, and it does require again consistency from staff to make sure that rule is stuck to, and reminding pupils as well that if they do need to contact home, there's mechanisms in school. They can use the school phones and so on, and vice versa with their parent as well. One issue that we are aware of is that I think what does happen, I'm sure it happens in many schools, is that pupils, they do use their phones when they go to the toilet, and it's very difficult to do obviously anything about that. Now, the unintended consequence of that is that the cubicles can then become full in the toilet if you've got pupils using them there. So one thing we're considering and looking at, we've noticed other schools have taken another approach with mobile phones and we visited a school that have taken this approach recently, is that some schools now are making sure that there's a heightened level of the mobile phone ban by putting them in pouches with magnetic latches on them that can't be opened during the day, and that would then get around some of the problems we still experiencing, like I've just spoken about, where some pupils the phone should be often in the bags. However, that we know that's not always the case. So when we're walking around at lunchtime, you do see pupils perhaps open up the bag and looking at something inside the bag and then closing the bag. So it's probably happening more than, when I say more probably happening, pupils are probably still using their phones in a discreet way then, which is something that we find it more difficult to monitor and so on. So we are looking at strengthening the policy further. Our policy at the moment is if they're found using the phone during the day, then similar, as Stuart said, there's a script we'd follow, hand it over, it's kept safe during the day, picked up at the end of the day, and then if it's multiple occasions, then we engage the parent, and the parent comes into school, meet with the head of year, for example, and talk through how to avoid this in the future. So but I think most importantly is to stress the importance of it. I really feel strongly that the mobile phone ban is important. Otherwise, it's distracting pupils from the learning. Yeah,
that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah,
we're not going to eradicate it completely from toilet cubicles, but if it's not in classrooms, pupils being distracted from their learning, that's the key purpose of it, really, isn't it?
That's it. I don't think we're certainly not at the stage that have total no use of phones in the school. But as you say, Stuart, it's about mitigating that and trying our best to limit it as much as possible, and just thinking, what else can we do? This is part of school improvement, isn't it? What else can we do to make this more effective?
I would say that the work we did around the the consistency in that approach was a really helpful factor in us developing that kind of more consistent approach to behaviour generally in the school. You know, because it was a really demonstrable example of that working, and it was really visible. You know, we would have challenges around phones and different approaches in different classrooms, and once we, you know, worked that through and it was implemented consistently and people saw the impact of that consistent approach, that was really a helpful driver in applying that to the rest of our approaches to behaviour and teaching and learning. You know, things like we have try and do consistent approaches around meeting and greeting at the start of a lesson and ending and sending at the end of a lesson, you know, which are not always, particularly for more experienced teachers, you know, who can run a classroom with their eyes closed and their hands tied behind their backs. But it's just as important that they use those strategies for when their less experienced colleagues are trying to implement them, you know, that they are the same kinds of starts and ends of lessons that they're going to get in every classroom. And so the impact that mobile phone ban and the approach we used, when, you know, that became clear, it really kind of changed the mood around why it was important that we all did these things, even if we didn't necessarily need them in our particular classroom. So it was important. The mobile phone ban was important in its own right, but it was also an important moment in our school of shifting that culture towards a really consistent approach.
It's that collegiate spirit again, isn't it? And
that ownership and team first values and stuff identified themselves, really.
You mentioned earlier, Stuart, about, I think it's important. I'm just thinking as you talking about the importance of the why and explaining the why the pupils regularly about why the phones are banned. And there's so much evidence out there, of course, in terms of the negative impact that overuse of social media and mobile phones can have. And sometimes it's perhaps easy to forget not to refresh pupils and staff on why we do it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, young people, I think they understand that really clearly, actually. And there is some evidence. There was a recent study being talked about the biggest declines in social media use is actually in younger people, in people 16 to 25. You know, I think they're starting to recognise the negative impact that those can have on their well-being.
Really promising to hear that.
Yeah, it was on that More or Less Radio 4 programme. Over the Christmas holidays. So that was really interesting, actually.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you both. So moving on then finally to looking at professional learning, because again, from the thematic report, it was very clear to see that professional learning opportunities, of course, are important, but maybe more so around professional learning relating to behaviours. And you've both spoken about sort of your approaches using scripts, you know, sort of informing staff of certain ways possibly to deal with certain situations or scenarios. So in terms of the professional learning, possibly turning to you first of all, Gareth, you know, we do see a lot of different professional learning opportunities available, but what would you say has worked in the context now of thinking about the relationships, the behaviours, you know, and those sort of areas we've been discussing today?
Yeah, well, first and probably most importantly, the reason and the importance of professional learning is what we just spoke about, again, getting that consistency and collegiate approach within staff. And before, I'll go through a few examples on what professional learning we've gone through over the last year, which probably relates back to what we've already spoken about earlier. And but before we have an insight on a particular aspect of related to behaviour or whatever it may be, then we would agree on what we're going to do as a school by running it through our behaviour working party first. So the behaviour working party in school consists of representation from staff in different subjects of the school and perhaps some more experienced staff and less experienced, and they would then meet. For a good example of that would be our positive behaviour policy, because they wrote that whole policy pretty much themselves, decided what we need to do as a school after doing some research, so that when it comes to the professional learning and the inset day, those staff are actually presenting. So it's coming from the staff as opposed to it being imposed on staff, because they've obviously done the research. They're working with senior leaders as well. It's been agreed. So immediately there's that shared ownership across the school community. And ideally as well, just extending that further, using pupil voice and parental workshops as well to get input from all aspects of the school community, speaking to and getting perspectives of governors as well. So get that right first before we start the professional learning. So some examples of professional learning. I spoke earlier about this in terms of having the positive behaviour policy being successful. It's how it's done, and I spoke earlier about the five C's, and the 5 C's that we're looking for from staff is based within what we've got, a trauma-informed approach. So staff would explain why it works, and we had an external presenter come in and train staff about the science behind cognitive development and how pupils' brains are developing very rapidly and how they react differently in terms of how they're spoken to. So it's not just a case of saying, right, this is what we're going to do, get on with it. We've done our research. This is what we feel is going to be successful, and this is why we're doing it. So it's explained as well the rationale behind it. And with the trauma-informed approach, then it was explained to staff about why certain pupils react in certain ways, because they'd have had adverse childhood experiences. And I think having that knowledge as a teacher in school helps you understand why. Going back to Stuart's point earlier, it has to be done by all the staff in the school for that to be effective. Another professional learning point we spoke about was the inclusive classroom practice, whereby our Elenco spoke to all staff about how we can engage all the pupils in the class. I spoke about the text box with the buff background and so on. That was really important and made a big difference, but further evaluation on that needs to be done. But I think crucially, the professional learning can't be one-offs. So you bring in a change, for example, and be it around behaviour or whatever it may be, but you've got to be you've got to keep going back and refreshing expectations with staff, because naturally there's going to be some staff that are going to be leaving school, and there's going to be staff joining the school, and in such a busy job as teaching is, it's easy to forget sometimes what the expectations. Now, we spoke earlier about meet and greet, and just if all staff are able to buy into that and follow those expectations, then it's going to be obviously a better school culture, and everybody then plays their part in that. So it's making sure that it's not a one-off, and you use inset days obviously to refresh staff meetings, and sometimes if there are staff that perhaps aren't you notice aren't actually following the expectations, then that just needs addressing to make sure that the school culture and the behaviour then isn't eroded, and that you maintain the standards.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. Yeah. Anything to add there, Stuart, around, any professional learning that you've found useful, beneficial to staff?
Yeah, I think what Gareth's saying about the consistency and, addressing a lack of consistency is really, really important for any behaviour system to work. I mean, I do sometimes worry, particularly in the areas of behaviour, well-being, those kinds of things. There is sometimes a lot of money and resource invested in ideas and schemes that have very little robust evidence behind them, certainly peer-reviewed evidence of impact, and at a time when resources are so precious, it's really important, I think, that we're not looking for silver bullets, actually, because I think the important the factors that make the difference really are around how well and how consistently they're implemented in that particular school. And for that, any kind of professional learning around behaviour, inclusion, well-being processes, skills, experiences of people, they do need to be rooted in the ethos and the values and the culture of the school. It's very difficult to go and visit another school, even if it's a mile away, and take what they do and transplant it into yours, particularly in this area, because if it doesn't fit to your ethos and culture, it's not going to be bought into. It's really, it's around how do we, whatever we choose to do in our school, whatever we think are the important behaviours we want children to display and ones we want them not to display, it's how consistently we implement that as a group. In terms of what we've done in our school, we have developed a series of professional learning resources, particularly around supporting NQTs and staff new to the school, and some colleagues where perhaps we've identified inconsistencies in that approach, which we use with them in professional learning sessions, particularly through the first term or so of the academic year. We also kind of interrogate and examine our quality assurance evidence quite extensively through the year, and particularly in the summer term, so evidence around behaviours, positive behaviour, detentions, exclusions, those kinds of things, to look at, where are there gaps, where are we not doing as well as we want to do, and what are we going to do about that. We also get quite a bit of pupil and staff voice feedback as well, and they help to set the priorities. So, for example, over the last couple of years, staff have fed back that, strategies to tackle low-level disruption in lessons is something that, they really want us to focus on. So, it's using that kind of evidence to focus what we do with all staff then in set time and our positive relationship meetings that we have. So it's really about, I guess, in terms of professional learning, it's about looking at what the need is in your school at that particular moment. And that does change, as Gareth referred to, when you have, a little bit of a turn. We've had a number of experienced people retired over the last couple of years, and a number of teachers new to the profession come in. That does change, actually, doesn't it, where you need to focus your professional learning time and energy and effort.
Thank you both. We are coming towards the end, and just wondering, from both your perspectives, really, what do you feel that the education system, needs to provide, could provide in terms of having that greatest impact on the challenges that schools are facing? Because there are challenges around behaviours, and seems to be the landscape is ever changing as well around behaviours that are seen in schools. So possibly starting with yourself here, Stuart, what do you think that the education system could provide here to support?
I guess one of the sort of big challenges that schools face at the moment is around the kind of real terms funding that we've got and the reduction in that, really. What we talked about, some of those provisions and bespoke curricula earlier on that we use and most schools will use. But, we feel that they're effective in helping us address the challenges and needs of groups of young people. But that obviously is expensive. It's more expensive than running a mainstream class, a mainstream lesson for 30 pupils. But without those smaller kind of tailored interventions and provisions, those children may well end up being lost to mainstream school when they don't need to. And therefore, that greatly increases their risk of social and educational exclusion. So I do worry about that kind of without real terms increases in our budgets compared to things like pay inflation and other costs that we have to face, that we're not going to be able to sustain what we've got at the moment, never mind to extend that further. So, I think that's a real challenge for the whole system to grapple with. And then secondly, when we were talking about professional learning earlier, I kind of mentioned it then really, but I think it's really important that with the resources we've got, that we do put that into strategies that are evidence-based and have a real kind of peer-reviewed impact on improving behaviour and outcomes and social inclusion of young people, rather than the temptation to look for magic potions or silver bullets that are the kind of panacea to the ills, because I don't think they exist. If they did, we'd have found it by now, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, we'd all be doing it, Stuart, if there was an easy answer out there. And there just isn't an easy answer. I think the theme was coming through here is you need to be relentless in terms of applying and having this collegiate approach in schools with behaviour, and you've got to keep on keeping on. But in terms of what would be helpful, I spoke earlier about the importance of alternate provisions for pupils, and it's really difficult to fund currently, I think, across schools in Wales at the moment. That there's a need there for more alternative provisions. We've experienced lots of success where the right provision has been put in early in the school life of some of these children, and it's great to see the trajectory then as they improve from years 7 to 11, where they have this quite intense and comprehensive package of support put around them. But we just need more of that. There's no winners when you've got a pupil in school who, and we talk about very small numbers, there's no winners when you've got a pupil in school who's just refusing to buy into the school culture or is being continually defiant. And it's very difficult for teachers and school staff to deal in those situations. And tied to that, of course, I think it's important to recognise the importance of sanctions for pupils to understand that there is a consequence to their behaviours. We never want to put an exclusion in place, be that internal, fixed term or permanent exclusion. We want to make sure the schools are inclusive and accessible for all, but that can't be at the risk of losing the part of the school that makes it successful, the school culture and so on. And these are the decisions that have been made on a day-to-day basis in schools. So what you want to find is that part, is that section in between. You've got the mainstream, you've got exclusions. You don't want to be going there, and you want to find this alternative. You want to find the answer for these pupils that aren't buying into the full mainstream education. And in order to achieve that, it does come down to having additional funding. So, aside from that, then we talked about parental partnerships and the importance of parental partnerships. I think, there could be some work done around perhaps how there could be more effective home school contracts or partnerships and parents perhaps signing up to, this is what I agree to do in terms of supporting schools. I don't know exactly how it would work, but I think, there could be some work, some thinking around that and perhaps at the local or national level, how that perhaps could be used to support schools. So I think schools need skilled, supported staff who stay calm and consistent to get the best out of pupils, staff who believe behaviour can improve a certain pupils and believe the best, you can get the best out of pupils with a growth mindset, are good at building relationships but also putting clear boundaries in place. And I think when those pieces come together with the funding, appropriate provision, parental support and strong staff, it'll go a long way to creating the culture and the type of behaviours we want for our pupils in school.
Well, thank you both very much. It's been a really interesting discussion. So thank you to Gareth Rees and Stuart Davis during this discussion today. And of course, there are lots of things discussed there around positive working relationships and a sense of belonging and the different challenges and the ways that those can be navigated in schools. If you want more information about the findings of the thematic and what's available on our website, of course, is the thematic report itself, but also the toolkit that accompanies the report that may be of help to schools. If you found the conversation today useful, then please subscribe and share this podcast. Thank you.